All right, I think we'll get going. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Schwartz Outdoor Leadership Center. I'm Michael Woodruff, class of '87, director of the Bowdoin Outing Club. And I'm very excited today to be hosting this event with one of our esteemed alumni, Michael Perry of the class of '74. I met Michael back, well, maybe for the second time, back in the early '90s when I came back to work at Bowdoin. Jim Lentz introduced me, and at the time, Michael was the director of the Outdoor Discovery School at L.L.Bean, and he was always claiming to have the best job in Maine, which I constantly disputed. And I think actually the proof is in the pudding, because I am still in my job, and he has since left his and done many exciting adventures, and he's here today to share those with us. So Michael, thank you very much for being here, and I will look forward to seeing the show.
Sounds great, Mike. Thanks for the great intro, and hello to the Bowdoin community. It's an honor to be with you. We're going to put you in some kayaks, and we're going to do a 32-year adventure. Thank goodness it's only going to be 50 minutes long, though. Don't panic. It won't take 32 years to do the show, but we're going to circle New England. So I'm going to get the pictures going, and then we have a little map to kind of explain what we're going to do here. Bear with me. Okay. All right. So you notice the red line, that outlines the journey we're going to go on. Back in the early 80s, 3 friends and myself had paddled a lot of the Maine coastline. We had a little segment to do to complete the whole coast. That was from Rye, New Hampshire up to Portland. So in October of 1985, we finished that 60-mile section. And then we set sights for New England and got down to New York City and said, boy, we're having a great time together. Once a year, the 4 guys getting together. So decided to continue the trip. And the concept became, well, let's paddle all the way around New England. The only way to do that is to paddle your kayak up around Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, the Gaspé of Quebec, down the St. Lawrence. There's a canal system from Sorel down to Lake Champlain. That was the crux of the whole journey, to be able to get from the St. Lawrence to Lake Champlain, then from there down to New York City and the Statue of Liberty. It took us 32 years to do it. So we would take 4 or 5 days each year and do a 100-mile or 150-mile section. Now these are sea kayaks. Think of them as covered canoes. So they're great in open water travel. You can take a wave over the bow without filling the boat with water. They do not come with wheels. You do not want to know why that kayak has wheels. Now, I'm not going to show you many pictures of the Maine coast. Having been up here for 4 years, many of you know Maine better than I do, but this is a classic Maine scene near Stonington, all those granite ringed islands. Well, way back in 1985 when we started this adventure, oh my gosh, we had a lot of hair, didn't we? Weren't we handsome back then? Well, on our last little segment in October 2017, as we gathered to drive down to the Hudson River, my wife took a picture of us 32 years later, and boy, something had changed. But check out those hairlines, although I think I'm doing pretty well on the left there. The other 3 guys need to be sponsored by Rogaine. I do have some hair going there. So 32 years later, we're taking a lot more Advil and not much hair left. On that original 85 trip, we paddled up from Rye to Portland, stopping here at Walker's Point. This was the summer home of the Bush family. Now keep in mind the year, 85, no problem stopping. We had some peanut butter sandwiches. You can't get near this place now since 9/11, Walker's Point. So this is what it would look like this summer. Notice there's been much more development on Walker's Point as the Bush family's expanded. Well, back in 85, there was something around called a payphone. You young grads have no clue what this is, but you put a couple of dimes in, you could call. Tom's calling a friend to come pick us up at the end of our journey, because we would start at one spot. 4 or 5 days later, you're 120, 130 miles down the coast. How do you get back to your vehicle? So each year, we would start right where we'd stopped the year before. We would drive back to that spot and continue on our route. This is from Horseneck Beach in Massachusetts. We're headed down to Old Saybrook, Connecticut. Well, you camped where you could. And this is west of Newport, Rhode Island, a little town called Narragansett Pier. We pulled up, there was an abandoned shanty and home away from home, like the Hilton. The worst campsite of the 32 years was Stonington, Connecticut. This was a rare spring trip in April, and a big nor'easter was chugging up the coastline into New England. And we were listening to the weather radio and knew that we wouldn't be paddling the next day. It was very stormy. The only place we could find in Stonington Harbor was this little hummock. At 11 o'clock at night, high tide came right in the opening of the tent. This was the most miserable 2 days we've ever spent. A very wet experience. Thank goodness we got out of there. I think they're really ready for climate change along the Connecticut coastline. Boy, check out this person's house. One of the images of paddling the Connecticut coastline in the morning, here we were out on Long Island Sound, free as birds, and you'd hear 8 o'clock in the morning, and then again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sound of rubber on pavement. All those poor commuters headed up to Hartford, Connecticut, or headed down to New York City, and there we were out on Long Island Sound, peace and quiet. We got to New York City on this particular trip. On the outskirts, a little island called Hart Island. We stopped to take a break and walked up to this field, Potter's Field. This is where all the homeless people in New York City who pass are taken out here and buried. Thousands and thousands of little white crosses. Boy, this was very sobering. You know, all four of us just were very thankful to come from very warm and loving families. And to think you could die and have nobody loving you at the end. Potter's Field. Well, again, this is 1993. So we're paddling down the East River towards the Statue of Liberty, and this will complete the whole New England coastline in a span of 8 years. You got the United Nations on the right in Manhattan. Isn't this a sobering picture? My gosh, you got the Twin Towers on the right. Tom's headed on the Brooklyn Bridge. And if I'd said to any of the three other guys that day, hey guys, in 8 years, those towers aren't going to be standing. Do you think any of us could have come up with any reason why they wouldn't be standing? None of us saw that coming. Here we are at the tip of Manhattan. Some of you might commute daily with the Staten Island Ferry. There's the Twin Towers on the left. So we've done it. In 5 minutes, we have paddled the whole coast of New England together. But now the real work begins. There's the Statue of Liberty. Now we will see this Statue of Liberty 24 years later, coming at it from the different direction, coming at it from the Hudson River. So 24 years later, we'll see this statue again. So now the work begins. We headed up to the Bay of Fundy, the Brunswick shoreline on the left. This is the home of the largest tides on planet Earth. The further you go up, the higher the tides get, until at the head of the bay, they're 50-foot tides. It was really neat what the wind, the waves, and the water and the years have done, creating these arches in the rock. It was like paddling through a keyhole in a door. So again, this would be the New Brunswick side of the Bay of Fundy. Well, the four of us are not very good cooks. And we just fill the pot with noodles, since we call it volume. And if it tastes good, we made a mistake. Now, another year, another trip. So we're on the other side of the Bay of Fundy. Now we're on the Nova Scotian side. This is an area, probably one of the most beautiful parts of our 32-year journey, called Cape Split. You can see why it gets the name, because of the split in the rock on the right. You see those little shards of rock on the left. Those used to be the size of the rock in the middle of the screen. So just amazing thing, geologic time, we're talking millions of years. And us, if we're lucky, we live to be 100 years old. Now, around that point is Minas Basin, some of the most powerful tides and currents in the world. We were so lucky, we hit it at slack tide. We were able to get around the corner. Now, for decades, they've been trying to figure out how can we harness the power of these daily tides to generate electricity. They've been working at this a long time. The problem is the water is so powerful that it destroys much of the equipment they're putting there to capture the energy. So they haven't quite figured this thing out yet, but when they do, the Bay of Fundy and Minas Basin will be producing a lot of power for New England. This will give you a great example of the tide. Now here in Maine, we have about a 9-foot tide over a 6-hour period. Well, up there, you're getting a 40 to 50-foot tidal range in that same 6 hours. So tide's coming in. You can see it just fills that whole basin. So at high tide, you still had lots of topography to enjoy, the cliffs embedded with fossils. Again, this is the Minas Basin. Along the way, every 3 days or so, we need fresh water. So I'm the socializer. So I'm the one who gets nominated to go up to a stranger's house, rap on the door, and get our water bottles filled. Well, this day I went up. The other three guys are hiding down on the beach. This woman sees me and says, "Oh, I'm just taking some blueberry cobbler out of the oven. Would you like some?" I said, "I'd love some, but I got three friends down on the beach." She says, bring them up. So I yelled down, and the poor husband, he's in the corner. And she's just taking this steaming cobbler out of the oven, and it was gone in 3 minutes. And the poor husband, he was crestfallen because that was his dessert for the night. And his wife was great. She said, "Honey, don't you worry. Once the boys leave, I'll whip up another batch of blueberry cobbler." So typical of the people we met along the way, always trying to help you out. So remember the year before we were across Minas Basin? That's Cape Split in the background. Beautiful sunset. This will also give you a feel of the tidal range. You see the kayaks down there. They're 18 feet long. And the tide had gone out for 3 hours, so it still had 3 more hours to go out. These tides and the movement of water, they were intimidating. You really had to work with the moving water. Again, tide going out, exposing the barnacles. And now this next picture shows a bunch of ledges. And at high tide, you wouldn't see those ledges. They'd be covered with feet and feet of water. But at low tide, you'd have to negotiate through them. You're doing a great job. We've done the New England coastline. We've done the Bay of Fundy. And now we're going to do a segment of trips to Circle, Nova Scotia. First, Yarmouth, Nova Scotia to Halifax, the capital, then up to Canso, then up around Cape Breton Island. So you get the idea. Each year, a different segment to complete our Circle of New England. Now you got 4 L.L.Bean employees, so obviously it takes twice as long to set the tent up as if you had just one setting them up, because everybody's got a new idea on how to set the tent up. Nice thing about Nova Scotia is much of the land is publicly owned. So my gosh, at the end of the day, well, there's a nice looking beach. Let's camp there. Very different here in the States. The fog, well, we have our charts and compasses, and we actually love the fog. It just was so peaceful. Just like you and the rest of the world, it disappeared. Fishing was good along the Nova Scotian coastline. These are bluefish. So we gathered some driftwood that night and had a nice bonfire and cooked the fish up. Plenty for everybody. Another trip ends in Halifax, Nova Scotia, the capital. And this is an oil rig. It's actually towed in off of Newfoundland. They had to do some work on it. So we had never paddled under an oil rig before. Halifax Harbor. So the next year we would drive all the way back to Halifax, do another segment. This next segment will be longer. It'll be 150 miles. Now this was August of 1992. You're looking at the QE2, Queen Elizabeth II. This is the night it set sail on its way down to Massachusetts. And when it got into Buzzards Bay a week later, it ran aground, ripped a big hole in the hull. They had to send all the tourists home. I don't know if you remember that in the early 90s when the QE2 ran aground. So we literally were there the night it set sail for that ill-fated rendezvous with the ledge. As we head up the Nova Scotian coastline towards Canso, well, other ships had met a similar fate. This old fishing trawler probably been sitting on that rock for 50 years. They don't lobster during the summer in Nova Scotia. Their lobstering season is during the winter, spring, and late fall. We met a lobsterman. He said, "Look, if you see any buoys out there, pull them up, pull the traps up, and you take the lobsters," because we can't legally. So we pulled the first one up we saw, and we had a 4-pound lobster. Nice. Stopped in at Cape Breton on Fortress of Louisburg. This is the greatest restoration project in the history of Canada. It's kind of like their equivalent of Colonial Williamsburg. This was a great fort called the Gibraltar of America, built by the French during the French and Indian War. But in 1758, the British surrounded it and drove the French out, took it over, and burnt it down. It's all been restored. Some of you probably have taken a vacation up to Cape Breton Island. It's part of Cape Breton Highlands National Park, but there's a great road called the Cabot Trail that encircles Cape Breton Island. It's 185 miles long. It's truly one of the great automobile drives in all of North America. Oh, we felt like Robinson Crusoe, first human beings on that beach. Well, not really, just seemed that way. This was probably one of the most beautiful parts of our journey, paddling up around the tip of Cape Breton Island. Most beautiful campsite here. We're looking over the vast Gulf of St. Lawrence, a place called Meat Cove. You've got your little L.L.Bean tent set up down on the shoreline. That night, Tom decided not to write in his journal. He could do that any other night. Instead, just enjoy the beautiful sunset over the Gulf. From here, if we went to the right 75 miles, we would hit the tip of Newfoundland. Really, the northern tip is dramatic. Just think of the geologic forces that have created this uplifting in our Earth's crust. Again, just the timelessness of geography and geology. And us little human beings aren't here that long. And don't we look miniature compared with that cliff? This really shows us the power, the volcanic forces within our Earth. And another arch to paddle through. So again, if you've driven the Cabot Trail, you've been on that road. 185 miles of sheer terror. If you're afraid of heights, probably is not the kind of vacation you want to take. So another year we drove up and we did the west coast of Cape Breton Island. The plan had been to cross Georges Bay, but the day we got there it was really windy. So we decided to do the safe thing, just follow the shoreline around. It was tempting though. We would have saved a lot of miles to head straight across. But we always do the wise thing. We want to come back and see our families. But boy, that 5-day trip was very windy, wavy, cold. And you just like being inside a washing machine, just tossed all day. And you got to land at night and I just would kneel down and kiss the ground. Thank goodness we're on terra firma. This little video will give you a feel of what it was like for the 5 days. It's taken from a smartphone, so it's a little rough. Well, the video didn't work, so we'll forget that. So some of you probably have been to Prince Edward Island. If you have, you've been over that bridge. But before 1997, that bridge wasn't there. It used to take a ferry across. So the bridge was built. It's 8 miles long. It's the longest bridge over ice-covered waters in the world, because this does freeze in the winter. They made it crooked so you wouldn't fall asleep at the wheel. So they thought of everything. It's a $47 toll going over, but it's free coming back. I just love this picture. Again, the New Brunswick coastline. Looks like little tiddlywinks all piled together. Well, we made a mistake this afternoon. We wanted to stay in the protection of this little lagoon, and we're at Kutchiboutchik National Park in New Brunswick, and we wanted to camp along the shoreline about a mile north of here. So we're going inside, but the tide was going out. In the last half mile, we're just dragging the kayaks through the mud. So we made a mistake. You're probably wondering, Michael, do you guys always paddle with a basketball with you? No, we found that floating in Northumberland Strait. Mid-September, and boy, it was cold the next morning, 32 degrees, and we really weren't ready for that, as you can see. Don't we look like we're all shivering there? And boy, you really want to go with us when you see this picture. Don't we eat well? My breakfast in the middle there is a bucket of peanut butter with a granola bar stuck in it. Yum, yum. Invariably, each trip, each year's journey would end with a long day, the last day, getting to our takeout site. And we had arranged, I'm the logistics guy, we would have arranged and paid somebody to bring our car from where we started to where we planned to end up. And you'd get out and hope your car would be there, and it would be. Well, the next year, we started from that point. We headed up around the Gaspé. That winter, I called up to Neshuac, New Brunswick. I usually would call the town office of the town we're starting from. Hey, does anybody want to make a quick $200 next summer? And I'm obviously looking for a retired person with some time on their hands. And they'd say, well, we'll call you back in a couple of days after we find somebody. And I hadn't heard from them. I called back, says, well, we haven't found anybody. They said, you might want to talk with the mayor. So I called the fellow, second from the left. I'm sorry, second from the right. And he said, well, I'm the mayor. I can do anything I want. Pay me the $200. I'll shuttle your vehicle. So we were shuttled by royalty, the mayor of Neshuac, New Brunswick. I think he was just looking to get out of the office. Classic scene here along the New Brunswick coastline. You've got your rainbow emptying into the Gulf of St. Lawrence as we set the tents up. I just love this picture. It kind of has a Cape Cod kind of feel to it. and just the joy of being outdoors for 24 hours with 3 people that you hold dearly in your heart. So we're going to head up around the Gaspé of Quebec. This is very much a French-speaking part of Quebec. 700-mile drive from Bowdoin College up to the tip of the Gaspé. And we're going to circle the very eastern tip. Now, I had been up here back in the early 1980s with my wife, Chris, and we'd gone out to an island called Bonaventure Island. And notice that day we went out in September, all those gannets. They were very large seabirds, and Bonaventure is home of the largest gannet colony in the world. So you guess what Chris is doing? She's paddling very fast because they're eliminating on top of my wife. So we clamber up onto the island, and a half mile to the left, half mile to the right are covered with gannets, the cliffs. 200,000 gannets. So some 24 years later, we were back here with the guys, and there were half as many gannets. So again, climate change has had an effect with the fish population, hence the gannet population, but there still were a lot of birds, but it didn't look like this as it had back in the early 80s. So there we are 2 decades beyond, after Chris and I had visited, and they'd made the island into a national park. So they developed the infrastructure. You got your dock there for the tour boats. You notice in the background, Per Se Rock. This is the largest arch anywhere in the world on salt water. Doesn't it look like a Scottish terrier drinking water? You can see the head to the right of the arch, and you can see the broad back and the little tail on the left. Scottish terrier drinking. Here's a view from the south, looking at the same rock. You got Per Se Rock on the left. You see the island in the background. That's where the gannets were, Bonaventure Island. So let's go back. There's your view from the east. Here's your view of the same rock, same rock from the south. So next picture, we're going to be 10 miles to the left, the next morning. You can see Per Se Rock to the top left of your screen. You can just barely see the little arch in the rock. We're 10 miles away. So finally, we reached the very tip of the Gaspé. This is really where the St. Lawrence River meets the Gulf, but it's very wide here. Gosh, it's 100 miles wide, the mouth of the river. This is a national park as well, Forillon National Park. We climbed up the top of a lighthouse and we're looking towards the west. 300 miles away is the city of Quebec City. Well, we'll be there in 3 years by kayak. On the way home, that 700-mile drive back to the Brunswick area, stopped for a late afternoon lunch at this beautiful chalet, the Mount Albert Chalet in the Chic-Choc Mountains of the Gaspé. So we're doing a great job. We've just paddled from Grand Verviers out to Mount St. Pierre. But on that trip, the wind was in our face most of the time. And us 4 guys are smarter than we look. So I said, hey, we're just beating our brains out trying to make progress. Next year, let's go the other way with the wind. Oh, that was much easier. St. Michel to Rimouski, Rimouski to St. Pierre. So again, logistics. How are we going to get our car from where we started to where we end up? We contacted Jacques, paid him the $200, and by the end of our journey, there was our car right where we took out. Thank you, Jacques. The road along the Gaspé is spectacular. The mountains come right down to the St. Lawrence River. How they built the road, I have no idea. From the tent of our at a campsite, we're looking at a Canadian lighthouse up on the road of the Gaspé. Now, one of these years, I came down with a hernia in the spring and had a hernia operation. And I was beside myself. Doctor, am I going to be able to go with my buddies on our annual trip? He says, Michael, you can go, but I don't want you to carry anything heavy. Have the guys carry your kayak for you. So boy, wasn't I lucky that particular year? They did all the schlepping for me. So the next year's trip, I came down with a hernia on the other side and had another hernia operation. Same thing. The doctor said, yeah, you can go, but the guy's got to carry your kayak for you. Darn it, I wish I could have worked out a 3rd and 4th hernia as the years went by, but you're only granted 2. I love this picture. Kind of sums up the whole trip, doesn't it? 4 buddies, year after year, doing a little segment around New England. This is again up on the Gaspé of Quebec, looking north. This particular day at dawn, very windy. You can see the white caps in the background. And we started out early in the morning, and we knew we wouldn't be traveling very far. It got windier and windier. Finally, we ended up on this island, thank goodness. And it was a very short day, pitched the tents and hoped that things would calm down the next day, which they did. But this is what it was like earlier when we started out that morning. Doesn't it look like we're paddling in chocolate milk? And this is what I call the calm part of the morning. It got winds are up to 45 miles an hour, and it was just stupid to be in the water. And we always make safe decisions. So we got off on that island I just showed you. Now, when you're in Quebec, you got to eat what the locals do. And this is a Canadian or Quebec delicacy called poutines. Basically, it's a plate of French fries smothered in gravy and squeaky cheese, also known as a plate of cholesterol. Don't tell your doctor you're eating that. Every year, Tom Armstrong's wife, Liz, would bake us a batch of Toll House cookies. How they lasted beyond the first night, I never could figure that out, but thank you, Liz. Again, a small human beings and big Mother Nature. Rimouski, Quebec, kind of looks like, if you've ever been up to Acadia National Park here in Maine, doesn't that look like Acadia country? So for 3 of the years, Jacques seemed to like that $200, and he would help us shuttle the vehicles to and fro, brought his wife the last year, posing with the guys. So we're gonna do the trip from Sorel up to Quebec City area. And can you tell it's September? Look at that morning fog over the St. Lawrence River. It'll dissipate in a couple hours. Had to be very careful though in the St. Lawrence. There was a lot of boating traffic. So this one's anchored though. It's not going to run us over. Finally, we get to Quebec City. You're looking up at the famous Chateau Frontenac. They say this is the most photographed hotel in the world. And on this hillside, the Plains of Abraham, was a great battle between the British and the French. In the fall of 1759, the British prevailed, drove out the French, and took over Quebec City, all part of the French and Indian War. But there was a very famous painting done in 1770 of that battle. It's called The Death of General Wolfe. The battle begins on the plains, and General Wolfe, the British commander, is instantly killed. The French commander, General Montcalm, he was wounded, but he lived through the night only to see the city fall the next day. The battle for Quebec. It's a great destination for the cruise ships. I love this one, Loose Lip Sink Ships, very brightly colored cruise ship at Quebec City. Well, remember I mentioned the worst campsite of the whole 32 years was Stonington, Connecticut? This was a close second. We called it the Hobo Campsite. We got there in a pouring rainstorm, very windy and cold. It's October. And the rain let up for about half an hour. We cooked, and we knew we weren't going to travel the next day. I said, guys, look, let's just clamber up this steep hillside up to the road. We'll hitchhike up to Quebec City for the day and spend the day in the city. That was the plan. My gosh, this hillside was like climbing Mount Everest. It was very steep and muddy, and we're in flip-flops and sandals. It was very hard to find our way. We're pulling ourselves up by the roots and the limbs. We finally come up in some guy's perfectly manicured backyard. He comes out in his deck in perfect English, says, "What are you boys up to?" And he said, "We're looking for Quebec City." So he said, "Just walk up my driveway, stick your thumbs out, somebody will give you a ride." Well, nobody did for half an hour. So we walked over to this family's house, husband, wife. They spoke a little bit of English, and we had our water balls with us to fill up with fresh water. And they asked what we were up to and said, "Oh, we're going to hitchhike down to Quebec City for the day." And they were so nice. He says, "Well, leave your water bottles here. Get in the car. I'll drive you the 15 miles down to the city." I said, "Oh, thank you." So he did. So we're getting out of the car. He says, "What time do you boys want to come back?" And I said, "What do you mean, what time do we want to come back?" He says, "I'll pick you up anytime you want." So I said, "How's 5 o'clock sound?" And he was there at 5 promptly and brought us back to his house. And we headed down over that cliff and down to the muddy tent site. So our day in Quebec City, we saw a little of this, a little of that. Check out these flower pots made of jeans, filled with dirt and plants. Oh, another cruise ship moved in overnight. We don't have the one with the lips on it. Now, the Hobo Campsite's down the middle of the screen. That was our 15-mile hitchhike up. This is a t-shirt we found, one of the local retail shops in Quebec City. Isn't it classic Canadian humor? Canadian takeout, and there's a bear taking a camper out of the tent. Well, you're doing a great job. My gosh, we haven't got much left to get to New York City. But here's the crux of the whole journey. How are we going to get from Lake Champlain up to the St. Lawrence River? Well, thankfully, there's a series of canals that connect the Richelieu River with Lake Champlain. So it's going to be a short segment, only 80 miles long. We put in at Rouse's Point, New York. We're going to head north towards the St. Lawrence. So we're in New York now, but a mile away around those trees is Canada. We get just into Canada, and there's this granite fort. It's got a weird name called Fort Blunder. How did it get that name? Well, it was built during the War of 1812, built by us Americans, we thought, on American soil. Well, they built it. Then they got some surveyors up there to actually survey it, and they found out, oops, we made a little bit of mistake. The fort's 100 yards into Canada. You think they would have sent the surveyors up first, then built the fort, but I guess they got it backwards at that point. So the Richelieu River, a lot of it's whitewater, and this canal was built not for commercial boats, but for recreational boats. So it's a recreational trail. So to bypass the whitewater, they have these canals and locks that raise the water up or lower it depending on what direction you're going. So you have to be real careful. We're in these kayaks. It's hard to see us. You know, the recreational boats who aren't really looking for kayakers. Along the way, plenty of places to pitch, little town parks, pitch your tent, picnic tables and porta potties provided. Next morning, we're rewarded with a beautiful morning sunrise, mist rising off the Champlain Canal. And this is all part of a national park. So the ranger staff, it's young folks and very personable. I love the mittens, don't you? You know we're in Canada, right? They got the Canada maple leaf. Hard to believe we're 15 miles east of Montreal, Canada. We're up in hill country as it meets the St. Lawrence. There's no bridges up here crossing the Richelieu River. So how do people commute to work? Well, they have these itty bitty little ferry boats. It's so cute. It's only like a 3-minute commute. You drive on the west side of the river. 2 or 3 minutes later, you go to work on the east side of the river. Oh my, remember we'd started a trip here on our way to Quebec City? Well, we're ending a trip coming up from Lake Champlain, Sorel, Quebec. Lake Champlain, we did another trip, 100 miles long. You're looking at Fort Ticonderoga, built by the French in the 1750s, but the British drove out the French in 1758. You remember Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys drove out the British in 1775. They took the cannon from this fort, they waited for winter, they hitched them up to oxen, and they dragged those cannon from Ticonderoga all the way down to Dorchester Heights in Boston. And those are the cannon that convinced the British to evacuate Boston in 1776. Well, camping on Lake Champlain was Spartan and non-existent. So we made do as best we could. And yes, we are eyeing that cow pasture, and the cows are looking at us like, where are you camping tonight? And we said, well, we hope we're camping with you. Had to be very careful that evening, though, on where you were stepping. My gosh, we're finally into the Hudson River. Only a couple more trips and we'll be down at the Statue of Liberty. Hope you're all hanging in there with me. Hope your arms aren't too tired. Albany, New York. Look at that clover leaf right next to the Hudson River. We're headed down to Hudson, New York, on the Hudson. Our image of our trip down the Hudson was the sound of the train. The east side of the Hudson, you had the Amtrak passenger trains. On the west side of the Hudson, you had the big, long commercial trains. You had the freighter traffic, container ships heading up to Albany from New York City. Here you're looking at Athens Lighthouse at Hudson, New York. So this ended our next to last trip. We would come back here the next October, and from here was 120 miles down to New York City and the end of our 32-year journey. So that next fall, it was very nostalgic. We've been at this for 32 years. And the trip actually does have an end. We're looking west towards the Catskills. Lots of lighthouses along the Hudson. This one's a bed and breakfast, Saugerties Lighthouse. Oh, what a nice place to spend a night. Nice views looking west, again at the mountains. There in October, you've got the foliage changing. Now this first night on that trip, camping options were few. We found this old abandoned pier. And we pulled up, set the tents up. And we're out in the middle of nowhere, so we think. All of a sudden we hear this motorcycle coming down through the woods. How it got down here, I have no idea. This guy bursts out of the bushes with a couple 6-packs of beer. And he says, I thought you'd be here. And we were beside ourselves. We said, what do you mean you thought we would be here? How do you even know who we are? He says, your trip's all over the internet. And I'm a kayaker. I figured out this is the only place you'd be able to camp. I took a chance thinking you might be here. There we were. What a nice guy. Leaves the beer. He knew we were tired, didn't want to talk long, and left. Next day, we stopped in Kingston, New York for the reenactment of the Burning of Kingston. Kingston was the capital of New York for a short period. When the British occupied New York City, the capital was Kingston, but the British sailed up the Hudson and burnt Kingston down in 1777. And they reenact that event every year. They don't burn the town down, but they dress up. Another Hudson River lighthouse. We're headed down to Poughkeepsie. Some of you might have had a good meal here at the Culinary Institute of America near Hyde Park. You're looking at the walkway over the Hudson. You'd have Highland, New York on the right, Poughkeepsie on the left. This used to be a railroad bridge, but it caught on fire back in the 1970s and it was closed down. My gosh, it took them 30 years. They raised $26 million and they converted it from a railroad bridge to a walkway, the walkway over the Hudson. So it was really neat to be able to walk up from the park up onto the walkway. It's 6,000 feet long. And the people on the right are looking down the river. You see Poughkeepsie on the left. And 25 miles down, you see the hills down on the right. That's where West Point is. That's where we're going the next day. And again, I'm the logistics guy. So in the winter, I would call, get some information, arrange a shuttle driver. In this case, we wanted to camp near West Point. So I called West Point and got in touch with somebody, and they got me in touch with the caretaker over there. He said, yeah, we usually don't let people stay on the island, but you can. They gave us approval to stay on Constitution Island for the night. So the caretaker comes down and meets us late afternoon and is explaining where to camp. He says, oh, by the way, just want to let you know, this is where George Washington reviewed his troops in 1778. I couldn't sleep all night. We're camping where George Washington stood. So remember we talked about the burning of Kingston by the British? Well, in 1778, we put this giant chain across the Hudson from West Point over to Constitution Island where we're camped. And no British ship could get beyond this chain. You couldn't ram it, you couldn't break it. And from 1778 onward, the British were not able to sail up the Hudson beyond West Point. Today, the only links that are left are up on the campus of West Point. These links weigh 114 pounds apiece. No wonder the British ships couldn't get through here. It was called the Great Chain. South of West Point is the Bear Mountain Bridge. For 16 months, this was the longest suspension bridge in the world. We're talking 1920s. Anthony's Nose on the right. Haverstraw Bay. It was mid-October, it was cold, in the 50s, windy, and there was a solitary sailboater out that afternoon. We felt such a kinship with somebody probably getting the last sail into the season, and we're literally our last full day on the river, or next to last, headed south. That night, we stayed in a little state park outside Ossining, New York. We're looking into town, and there's Sing Sing Prison. Next day, this is it, our final day. The Tappan Zee Bridge. Think how many times you've been over that bridge on your way south or your way back to Maine. Well, this is the new Tappan Zee Bridge built a couple of years ago. You see the old one in the background? That's since been torn down. This picture was taken October 2017. Remember I mentioned Cape Breton Island was one of the most beautiful parts of our journey? Well, for me, right up there was paddling down the Hudson and seeing the Jersey Palisades. I had never seen them. Boy, those folks living in northern New Jersey got a good thing going. It's beautiful. Finally, we see the skyline of New York City. Our hearts are pounding, thinking, oh, gosh, 32 years sure goes by fast. And for me, it was neat. My college roommate, Shell Stone, his wife, Cindy, had arranged to fly out from LA to meet us in New York City and kind of show us the city for the weekend. So Shell and Cindy, thanks for hosting us. We see you down there somewhere. Bear with me here. There we go. So we're going to camp in New York City. Well, that winter before, we'd call the Inwood Canoe Club. Right, it's near the Cloisters, up in the northern part of Manhattan. And they said, yo, you can camp out on our deck for a night. So home away from home, and we'll be safe and protected. That afternoon, we did head up to the Cloisters to get a little bit of culture at the museum. That evening, a lot of conflicting emotions, thinking we don't want our journey to end. And yet it is. A lot had gone on in 32 years in our personal lives and in the world. That next day dawned sunny, calm, and bright, 13 miles from here down to the Statue of Liberty. Heading under the George Washington Bridge. How many of you commute daily, maybe into New York City over that bridge? It's the busiest bridge, traffic-wise, in the world. Ellis Island, think how many of us have relatives that came from Europe, came to America to start a new life in the land of opportunity, and were processed here at Ellis Island. And finally we reach it, the Statue of Liberty. Remember we'd been here by kayak 24 years later? Boy, what a whir of time. We're back October 2017. But what a sobering picture. The skyline has changed during that time. The Twin Towers destroyed and now replaced by the Freedom Tower. So Shell and Cindy took us up to the tower that weekend as our families gathered to kind of celebrate our end of our journey. The view from the top of the Freedom Tower looking down the East River over at Queens, Brooklyn Bridge below us. Looking up the river, up the Hudson, somewhere up there 13 miles was the Inwood Canoe Club. You're looking at New Jersey on the left. Very sobering, isn't it? I know most of you have been to the Freedom Tower and they've left the original footprints of the World Trade Center buildings. A lot of tears are shed here. So all that 32 years, we'd started our journey in 1985, and a lot of things had gone on in the world during those 32 years as well. 9/11, 1989, the fall of Berlin, Reagan's famous speech, tear down this wall. So they did. 1994, Nelson Mandela became the first Black president of South Africa. 2000, remember in Florida, the hanging Chad? Isn't that shocking? How could that be 20 years ago? It seems like they were just looking at those ballots 5 years ago. 2011, the Situation Room at the White House. I just love this picture. Look how tense everybody is. But I love the picture of Hillary Clinton with her hand over her mouth like, my gosh, we're really going to pull this thing off. A lot had also changed in sports. 1985, we started. Red Sox hadn't won a World Series for some 70 decades, and they've won 3 since. How lucky could we be? Things changed in our personal lives as well. I was the only one married in 1985. The other 3 fellows got married, had kids. Here's Tom's daughter, Allie, picking out the first family puppy. Then you snapped your fingers. And then one day, she was graduating from Bates College. So boy, they grow up fast, don't they? They certainly do. Now in our family, we went through 2 black lab dogs. Our original dog, Bubba, back in the 1980s, she was more Chris's dog. So anywhere Chris would go, Bubba would go, and she's keeping all the bears and the moose away from my wife. The next dog, though, Mandy, I think she was more my dog. Well, how do I know? Well, check out the picture here. Yeah, I think Mandy was more my dog, don't you think? So I'd like to thank all of you in the Bowdoin community. Thank Mike for the wonderful intro and Rhodey and Amy for the chance to do this. I hope it's kind of given you a thought of your next vacation. I've always admired anybody that hikes the Appalachian Trail over time. It's hard enough to do it in one fell swoop, 2,100 miles. But there are some people that can't get away for 5 months, and they do the Appalachian Trail 1 week at a time until they've finished it many decades later. And I think that's so cool to figure out a way to do something. Maybe you can't do it the conventional way, but you know, there's always a way to do it. And we figured out, well, we're going to kayak around New England. If it takes a third of a decade, a third of a century, so be it. And you probably ask, well, what will you guys do now? All your trips are over. No, we do ski trips together. So the friendship's still strong and still going. We're just a lot slower than we used to be. So I'm going to stop the pictures here. Some of you may have had some questions.
Thanks, Mike. That was a great show.
Well, thank you.
I love your images. I know it's probably a little tough because you don't hear the audience laughing at your jokes, but I just wanted to reassure you that I was, at least.
Okay, good.
Everybody else is. We do have a couple of questions, and before that, if people want to add more to the Q&A, feel free. Also, the folks at Alumni Relations wanted me to let you know that we're going to have the recording of this session up on the Bowdoin website probably by the end of the week. So if you go to bowdoin.edu and go to the alumni page, you can check it out there. Mike.
Yes.
There was a question about why you chose to do most of your paddling in the spring and fall as opposed to the summer. And
that is a great question. Mike, you know, that's when we could get away because we wanted to save the summertime for family vacation. Plus, there's less boating traffic out there. And sometimes finding a campsite was a challenge. So just having less people out and about just made it easier to find campsites. And frankly, we all love cooler weather, the four guys. So it was just nice, the shoulder seasons. But that's a great question because the summer would have given us much longer daylight. That would have been a great advantage. And obviously warmer water, warmer air temps. But the shoulder seasons, they were good for other reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just less crowded. I know, you know, when we're out with the outing club, it's amazing the trips we get to do and don't see anybody out there, you know, in the same places you get a mob during the summer.
Exactly.
Second, there was a question about what type of kayaks, and what I noticed in the photos was you all actually, I think, used the same boat for that entire, every picture had the same boats in it. I was, you know, that's a good long lifespan for those sea kayaks. What different models did you have?
You know, Tom had a Nordcap. I had a Necky Arlick sea kayak. Charlie had a boat from Epic. And Ben had a Sea Otter from Pacific Water Sports, which is no longer made. Yeah. But all the common components were, they're decked over. Some had rudders, some didn't for steering. They're very seaworthy. They take seas. People often ask, well, aren't they tippy? Well, they're tippy if you're not moving. But once you get them moving, the conditions aren't going to tip you over. It's you who's going to tip yourself over. Because once you get a load, 100-pound load in those boats, you're right at the water line and you are so stable. Now, you wouldn't do that same trip in the smaller recreational lake kayaks. You couldn't make the speed, you couldn't carry the gear. It just wouldn't be safe. And you wouldn't do it in an open canoe as well. So sea kayaks are made for that type of trip.
Yeah. And you all had enough kind of head-to-head trial days over the course of those decades to kind of compare the kind of skeg, no rudder kind of comparison on under the same conditions. Any kind of insights on that?
I would say to anybody, if you're going to do a trip like that, have a boat with a rudder on it. And skegs are great. On the early trips, I had another kayak that didn't have a rudder. And I would joke with the guys, we'd be headed out in the morning, heading north. I'd say, I'm going to England for the day. I'll see you at the campsite at night. Because literally, my boat wanted to go to the right all the time without a rudder. And I constantly was paddling on my right to get the boat to join my guys on the left. So the joke in the morning was, well, I'm heading to Britain for the day. I'll see you at night. And I was doing this big arc. Oh, it was miserable. So a rudder is a good thing to have because it controls your direction by your foot pedals. And you don't have to do as much corrective paddling with your paddle.
Yep.
Boy, some great questions here.
Yeah, there are. Any thoughts on which sections of the trip were the most challenging in terms of paddling, either because of conditions or, you know, navigation, sea state, anything like that, wind direction?
Mike, probably the most challenging was the west coast of Cape Breton Island. It was very cliffy. So you get a lot of rebound waves where the waves hit the walls and they kind of come back out like you're in a washing machine. So you're just kind of bobbing and weaving the whole time. And people often ask, were you ever scared? I think that's another variation of that question. And frankly, if you get to the point where you're scared, something's gone wrong. You've made a bad decision being in conditions you shouldn't be in, hence you're scared. So hopefully you're never scared. You've assessed the weather situation to come. You know your skills honestly, and you know when to pull off before there's a problem. But for that 5 days, it was just, when you got to land, you just were thankful. I guess you'd say we were very focused, but not afraid. The other thing is, I think when you're out in really bad conditions in the open ocean, the tendency is to look way out and see all these breaking waves and the wind and way out there. Well, that doesn't matter what's going on way out there. What's mattering is what's going on the 5 feet around your kayak. So you just manage that 5 feet around your boat, and it's much more comforting because you can manage that. You can't manage the breaking seas a mile away that look intimidating. So a lot of it's a mind game more than it is physical. Just knowing your skills and being honest about them, consulting the weather, and knowing when to get off the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great advice, Mike, for thinking about doing trips on the ocean. Any other sort of trip planning or paddling, packing advice for folks if they want to try doing kind of similar kayak trips, even whether it's in Casco Bay or down the Hudson River or any other sort of spot wherever folks are? There's so much great kayaking all over the country.
Well, I will say one thing about packing. You may be sold and buy a waterproof boat. Water gets in anything. Check out your basement after a rainstorm or whatever. But so I would say get the best waterproof container bags you can. Don't skimp on that. And then double bag everything. We put garbage bags inside the best of the waterproof sacks. Yes, we just don't want stuff wet on a kayak trip. So that would be my advice, making sure you keep stuff dry, keep the boat balanced fore and aft. You just have, your water lines correct, and just do a lot of paddling before your trip. You don't want to have your wrists go bad on you or have some problems during the trip. So just be in shape before you do your little adventure.
Yep. Yeah, Mike, with your trip and thinking about, the sectional nature, what was your average sort of mileage in a day? How widely did that vary? And did you guys set a goal every day and try to meet that? Or did you keep going longer, if you got there early? Stuff.
Mike, great question. We plan the trip on 20 miles a day, but most of the time we go 25 miles a day. But occasionally you'd get storm-bound a day. And by planning the trip on 20 miles a day, you knew you could paddle 30 to 35 if you had to. But by planning it for 20, you knew you had a little fudge factor planned in there. So sometimes we would end the trip early because we had paddled the miles we were going to paddle. There's our car. So trip planning 20 a day, we usually average without much of a problem 25. I think the most we went was probably 40 miles a day, but that was with the current. And the St. Lawrence River, holy mackerel, it's like being on a conveyor belt.
I can only imagine. Yeah.
You know that, Mike.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, I asked you about challenging stretches. Were there any particular spots that you definitely want to go back and paddle again or just visit on land?
Well, frankly, being from Maine, I was enthralled with the Hudson River. And the other three might not give the same answer. They're more wilderness oriented. I love history. And I would do that Hudson River stretch from Lake Champlain down again and again and again. Just the history, you're just filled with it. And Cape Breton Island. And living in Maine, I think I take the Maine coast for I take it for granted. There's no more beautiful place than the coast of Maine.
Yep.
But it's kind of our backyard. So I would say Hudson River, and every outing was great.
Yep, great. Yeah, we are spoiled here on the coast of Maine, no question.
We are. Just look at the background.
One of our audience members, Joe Leghorn, is suggesting for your next challenge, you should think about Southeast Alaska. Have you done any boating up there?
actually have, Joe. Back in the 1987, we went on a 2-week trip up to Glacier Bay National Park. Talk about a spectacular place to paddle. You've got humpback whales breaching beside you, icebergs floating by. That's a spectacular place. But I have not paddled any other place in Alaska other than that.
Yeah. Well, if we are, sitting by the fire this winter, and we maybe get you back for another show, you can show us the slides from Southeast Alaska. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful place.
Yep.
Look like we have questions still.
We do still have some questions. We are getting towards the end of our time here, and I just wanted to see what we haven't touched on. Somebody asked about how far offshore you would get. Any thoughts on that when you're paddling?
Great question. The longest crossing we had between points of land was 18 miles, the crossing of Chaleur Bay up in the Gaspé, because we followed the coastline and then crossed the bay, let's say a 4 or 5 mile crossing, we would have added 90 miles to the trip. We were lucky one morning at dawn, pretty clear and calm. It took us 6 hours to make that 18-mile crossing. Mirror calm water, we were lucky, and we saved 90 miles by making that direct crossing. Other crossings were 7 or 8 miles. But most of the time, the open oceans, there's not much going on. You want to be next to the shore where the animals, the flora, fauna, the birds are. So we would try to stay along the shore just for the beauty.
Nice. That's great. Well, listen, Mike, I want to not keep you with us too long. Really appreciate
thank you
joining us today, and thank you to all our participants as well. I know when we were chatting before we started, you mentioned you're writing a column, a weekly column about adventures. Can you tell us?
Well, I write a column for the Maine Sunday Telegram once a month. It's called Canoeing in Maine, and I try to go to a new place. I've been doing this column for over 20 years. My wife keeps saying, "Aren't you going to run out of places?" And I don't. And that speaks to the beauty of Maine. And it's just a joy. I can't believe I'm writing a column, and I get emails of people going to these places, and it gives me great joy to know they're out there enjoying something as well as I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's amazing. We always will go on a river trip, and a student will ask me, "Why don't we paddle this more often?" And I'll be like, "Because there's so many rivers to paddle. We paddled it 20 years ago. I just haven't had a chance to get a group back here. It's pretty cool." All right, well, we will wrap it up. Michael Perry, class of 74. Thank you all for joining us here at the Schwartz Outdoor Leadership Center. Even though you can't see it, it looks like I'm on the coast of Maine, but I'm here at headquarters. And once again, you can check it out online at bowdoin.edu. Go to the alumni page, and they'll have it up there later this week. Michael, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike, and best wishes to the Bowdoin community.
Yep, absolutely. Bye, everyone.